Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Ross Sutherland, a poet, podcaster, and filmmaker I've been following ever since I saw his brilliant Standby for Tape backup at Hot Docs in 2015. You might also have encountered his inventive podcast Imaginary Advice, which just won Best Fiction Podcast at the 2018 British Podcast Awards. He'll be bringing the show to the Fest in Chicago this Monday, October 1st, for a live recording at Lynx Hall. Ross picked Network, Sidney Lumet's 1976 satire about the yawning hellscape that is American television, and the anchorman named Howard Beale, played by Peter Finch, who becomes its unlikely prophet. Written by Paddy Chayefsky and co-starring William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Robert Duvall, Ned Beatty, and Beatrice Straight, the film offered a distressingly prescient view of news media. So prescient, in fact, that it no longer registers as satire. Nominated for 10 Oscars, it won 4 for Finch, Dunaway, Straight, and Chayefsky, and Network remains one of the key American films of the 1970s. We recorded this episode in London earlier this year, in the final days of Bryan Cranston's stage run of Network at the National Theatre. With the recent announcement that Cranston will be bringing the play to Broadway this fall, accompanied by none other than Tatiana Maslany, friend of the show, it felt like the perfect time to revisit Howard Beale's world. Even if, we're soaking in it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
This is like a kind of theme which is always on my mind. I think more so as years have kind of gone by. And maybe it's because the main subject of the podcast that I make, Imaginary Advice, is kind of all about those areas where real life and fiction meet. It's that kind of porous boundary. And the way that almost there are certain types of media that almost you can't come into contact with them without them changing you, and sometimes this is kind of cathartic, kind of helps us understand our own lives by kind of putting kind of narrative fiction over the top of it, kind of helps us identify archetypes and stuff like that. But it's also, you are flattening out your life and exploiting yourself. And if you lose control of it and hand over control of your story to somebody else, that's when things get really kind of strange and difficult. And I think that's kind of, for me, that's Network in a nutshell, really. I love it also for someone whose background is maybe primarily working in words and writing. My background was kind of writing poetry to begin with. And so I'm quite verbal in the stuff that I make. And of course, Paddy Chayefsky script is all verbal, and apparently he even had final cut on the film or something ridiculous.
Yeah, he as a writer he occupied a really odd space for a little while. In the 70s, I mean, there's the whole thing that happened with Altered States a few years later too,
which just kind of went off the deep end, right? Kind of lost control of it or something.
Yeah, he took his name off the script and removed himself from a number of other aspects of it. Promotion, production, but with Network, you have the feeling. The only comparison I can make is someone like Aaron Sorkin, who wields power in the service of his words and can get a little precious about it. But
it's so similar, isn't it? I feel to Sorkin, the speed of it and the use of repetition as well. That fooling you into thinking it's naturalistic, when in fact it's incredibly articulate. But and I think that doing that balance, and I guess also must be. Sidney Lumet is really rehearsing the heck out of these performances.
They must have been doing hours and hours and hours before every shot. But Lumet's his greatest quality as a director, to my mind, is that he gets out of the way. He doesn't influence the film, or he doesn't feel like he's influencing the film, and that documentary style makes you more quickly believe it. It seems more credible that this is happening because the film isn't trying so hard to make you believe in this world where things are just a little crazy. And now, of course, 40 years later, you look back at it and it's almost naive.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But Chayefsky, his point is that not only is corporate control of information coming, but it's already here. It's already entertainment, and the packaging phase is over. Now we're trying to deal with what happens when people succumb to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're now in this point where, we've got so good at selling authenticity that it doesn't exist anymore, right? Yeah. It's actually completely gone. Now something actually I didn't, on the first time you watch it through, and maybe this is also my own kind of naivety in watching it, but the moment when the big classic famous scene where he tells everyone that that they should say that they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore, and he gets everybody to throw open their windows and kind of shout that into the storm. First time I saw that, I was like, oh, look at this amazing moment of this call to arms, and he's having this great real effect on people. This is a real unmediated moment that's happening. And then kind of once you've watched the film through once, so you know where it goes, and you know just how cynical it's treating this kind of the transmission of information, and you watch it again and you're like, oh no, when they stand in the window and talk outside, they're putting themselves in little TV boxes. They are literally just parroting it, and actually, by getting them to chant a slogan, you're almost immediately absolved from it. You're immediately put into the position of role play. It's no longer about expressing your own fears or anxieties. It's just about, you're effectively just retweeting what he said to the neighborhood, right?
Yeah. Every time I watch it, I'm kind of trying to pay more attention to the percentage of people who are legitimately shouting and the others who are doing it with kind of a smile in their voice, because it's fun, because it's an opportunity that, Howard Beale, the mad prophet of the airwaves, which is just as much of a brand as anything else, is offering them a chance to, make the news fun.
Yeah.
By having a prolonged psychotic break.
And this is why it kind of reminds me of kind of what now we know as kind of meme culture, in that I was thinking about, this is years ago now, but remember South Park did an episode about ginger kids, and they said, oh, ginger kids don't have souls.
Right.
And then there was a young ginger kid who did this kind of video, and he filmed it in his backyard, and it kind of seemed genuine. It was maybe his phrasing was kind of weird, and it was hard to work out if he was just passionately shouting back against South Park, saying oh, of course ginger kids have souls, don't say that about us. But he was, so you can work out the authenticity exactly. But then all these other people just started copying it, and they're putting on, some of them are have ginger hair, some are putting on ginger wigs, and some of them are clearly on his side, and and some of them are satirizing him. And you're but all the other little mini details were always remembered. Everybody always went to a backyard to do it. They always remembered in the middle he makes a kind of woo sound at one point. All those little background little felicities are all sort of remembered. But no one cares. But the actual message is completely gone. Yeah. It's immediately erased.
Yeah, it's just fun to do the thing.
Yeah.
And to be seen to do it. It's bizarre because we went somewhere very different, I think, ultimately with news technology and entertainment, that intersection. Chayefsky predicted something where people would still sit in studios and do talking heads, and it's all very bleak and basic. There's not a lot of production, although it turns out, of course, that they're sponsoring their own Black Liberation Army, and it just feels like he took everything that was happening around him and shoved it into this one concept. And it makes perfect sense in retrospect, right? Because corporate control, the whole point, it's Disney now owns everything. That's exactly what this movie is about. It's just about the news division. And so quickly, it backgrounds the sense of Beale's illness, that this man is deranged, that he's not well. And rather than get him help or take him off the air, they just keep him on and exploit him. And I caught up to some of the earlier reviews and just the other day, just to refresh myself. And so many people are horrified at the exploitation of this poor man. And it's like, well, you just, you weren't thinking about reality television. That he got absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's something like I've got like a kind of I sit adjacent to a lot of reality TV stuff. There's a couple of things that I like. I like a dog whisperer. That's exploiting dogs. Is that okay? I feel is that allowed? But
I assume they all get cookies.
They get cookies. Yeah, they do all right. They don't know they're on TV, right? So like their egos are protected.
Yeah.
The dog ego. My girlfriend watches a bunch of the shows. Like she watches Geordie Shore, our version of Jersey Shore,
right?
And a couple of other ones where they just have to get the entire entertainment is about them getting paralytic drunk and then humiliating themselves and then the hangover and kind of like having to like parse the horrible things they said the night before and then repeat and repeat.
So they're just confronted with the footage? Do they show them what they...
They don't show them, but they go, I mean, these are huge, I mean, like, I think they end up kind of shoeless in a weird location. No. They're like they know that something terrible has happened, and like I can't imagine how it is for those people now who have had to connect directly this relationship between their own success and alcohol, right. On such like a fundamental level. How do you like move on from that? How do you then go on and do other jobs? You've probably got like a very brief window of time to kind of migrate from that show, which is basically like the gladiator floor,
right.
to something which is a bit more of a kind of presenter type job, right? Or that's it. There are people who are on these shows who have been on them for like 7 or 8 years, right. And then you're like, this is dangerous now for you to be kind of just like absolutely like annihilating yourself. And it's kind of, you're kind of framing mental illness and provoking it and prodding it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The thing about network, the thing about the film's characters is that they're much better at staying on message than real people. And that's because there's a script, right? That's the ultimate point of Chayefsky is that he has something to say.
Read every line.
Yeah.
Every word.
And he's making them say it. But you just watch this. I mean, we're obviously going to jump all over the plot, but you just watch this thing pinwheel through all the reactions to this thing and watching characters try to figure out what reality is and what normal is. And then in the middle of it all, you have the scene with Beatrice Straight where you just see the cost of cynicism. And you remember, you're forced to remember, oh, that's right, these are human beings.
Yeah, this is real life going on at the margins. I mean, comparing like that conversation with Max's wife to the one he has with Diana, which is all in screenwriter talk, right? He even says at one point, "Oh, it's like the exact. I know how predictable. Like it's the middle of Act 2 crisis, and it literally is the middle of Act 2." But to then suddenly have that little. I think that's why that performance of Beatrice Straight is. Was so kind of like well received, isn't it? It's this brief window into
it's the shortest performance to win an Oscar in history, which is amazing.
Talking of like people being on like auto cue, even Howard Beale when he's kind of like having his breakdown, like for a lot of the time the words are still coming from elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Of course he's used to being on a teleprompter and then he's no longer on teleprompter, but like his first outburst is pretty much a verbatim version of what Max says to him drunk in the opening scene.
Yeah.
He just parrots that back. Max probably doesn't remember because he said it in a moment of kind of drunken clarity, but that was what was going to be the future. And then, like Howard makes it real. And then someone's talking to him in his sleep. I guess that's the closest you could say to like something from his kind of his conscience or his subconscious kind of talking through him. But then you've got like the Jensen executive reprograms him to kind of say his message later on, like as well. So he's still, and I guess this is the thing about like prophets. They are meant to be vessels, right? Yeah. They're vessels from some higher force, and it's just that they're just kind of like fighting over who has control of that force's particular teleprompter.
Yeah. And of course, we call it channeling, which is even better, right? Like, he's literally switching channels between the people and the groups and the interests that are vying for him, and yet no one tries to counter it. When they come up with another prophet, it's incredibly fraudulent. You can just read it, right? There is a sense of truth happening in Peter Finch's performance, and it's just, I think what it is the way his eyes shift, and he doesn't really seem to know where he is half the time, and he looks scared when he's doing this. As he escalates and he starts waving papers, he stands up and he sucks the air in, and it's just, he's terrified. And of course, we understand why in the end. It's because they will kill him. But it's so weirdly human that it makes the prophet stuff land harder, I think.
It really is a knife edge of a film, and kind of like bolt lightning, as they sort of tend to say sometimes. Because you could, I mean, even sometimes talking about it in this way, you go like, oh, this sounds like insanely heavy-handed. It's so over. It's just like this shouldn't work.
Yeah, it could have gone wrong so many different ways.
Yeah.
At every stage. I mean, just every scene has the seed of its own destruction.
And it's that kind of, it's the sort of stuff that now you just like assume as with the sort of like the trappings of any kind of like pseudo postmodern story that is going to like call attention to its own construction. But weirdly, it manages to both be constantly calling attention to how it's constructed, whilst delivering these like very, very believable performances. Yeah, and it is Beatrice Straight's kind of just like anger and Peter Finch's just like bewilderment that sort of helps anchor it. And I don't even think a character like Faye Dunaway's character is not. I mean, like you couldn't really call her the villain because she's almost just like an automaton in a weird way. Yeah. There's no sort of decision to do this. This is just kind of at her heart who she is. I guess they call her like incarnated television.
Yeah, she doesn't act maliciously. She just acts pragmatically.
Yeah,
and that's the more terrifying thing because she doesn't value the people involved. She just wants to get the ratings up. And if you're going to cast someone to do that, Dunaway's so perfect. Dunaway in 1976 is just a shark. She's fantastic.
Yeah, I heard, anecdotally, that when Sidney Lumet brought the script to her, he said, it was something like, he says, I know you're going to ask where the vulnerability is, so I'm just going to tell you now that she doesn't have one. And if you try and put any vulnerability in, I'm just going to edit it out. So don't even try. Which actually is weird, but a good example maybe is Sidney Lumet telling someone what maybe an actor needs to hear, not necessarily what actually will happen in the film, because I think she does have like a tiny, tiny little bit of vulnerability at the end, but maybe you need to tell an actor, don't even try kind of like sympathising, because I'll cut it out.
I've always wondered how you do that, how you build this quote Edgar Wright once said about Scott Pilgrim, that the whole thing came down to getting everyone to pull on the rope at exactly the same tension, and that the director's job is to tell them what the tension is. So cast, crew, background players, everybody has to know exactly what the tone is of this film, and that's physically a tension. You have to figure it out. Network seems like another kind of film where this kind of movie didn't exist before they made it, so you're breaking new ground, and I would imagine Lumet would do anything, use everything in his toolbox to get there.
Yeah, and it's so these things which we will never know, these kind of coded, this kind of coded language, which, and I guess for every single person on the team, that's different, right? You all need to know it, like, you have to kind of describe that tension in a different way, which suits that individual artist. Yeah,
and still gets them to give the performance that you need.
Yep. Yeah. That coheres with everybody else. And it seems like, whether that's, knowing, all previous films that they've done and being able to kind of like pull something out of the archive, or, this is the thing that becomes utterly baffling to me, as someone who loves film, that is the area which just feels like the black box that I really do not know how it's done. Well, I guess it could because there is no cheat code, right? It is thousands of very, very small, very precise conversations.
Yeah, and just even the casting, like the decision to put William Holden in that role, who is ultimately known for strong, sympathetic performances, and make him weak and make him, impotent, unable to save his friend, and incapable of changing the direction of the world.
Yeah, just checked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, the last time I watched it, I was trying to figure out if he's supposed to be Judas or Saul. Like, where does he fit in a Christian sacrifice allegory? And I just don't think it works. I don't think you can go there. But he's the witness, ultimately. He's the one who simply stands there and takes it all in, realizes he's betrayed his own values and lost his friend, but it doesn't change him. Like, he doesn't come out of it shattered. He just continues to deflate.
This is it, isn't it? It is a film which is it's an arrow going straight down, and that's what's quite odd about it. That's why it feels more like an essay, in that like Padaczowski is kind of like taking an idea and goes, okay, well, I'm going to keep advancing this idea and kind of reducto absurdum. I'll show you where it eventually leads to.
Right.
But that means that it doesn't. Characters, there's no kind of like reconciliation. People don't change.
Yeah.
They just take what's in their heart and then just like let that lead them to whatever the bottom of the barrel is.
Yeah.
Right?
It's the despair of realizing that all the decisions were made months or years ago.
Yeah.
Like, this is just what's happening now.
And that's what gives it a weird feel. And I suppose, like, I think that is a kind of slightly unsettling part of it. And it means that despite the fact that it's, in many ways, is very, very linear, it doesn't necessarily feel very, it doesn't feel very Hollywood, which is, I guess, is intentional, of course. But, there's a, like, when it just, the way that it ends with him just being assassinated on air and then credits, it still remains kind of like shocking for that reason.
Yeah, it's always struck me as really, everybody is constantly relitigating the 1976 Oscars because it was 5 films which sort of speak to the possible directions of American cinema, where it was going to go, and which one, it was Rocky, Bound for Glory, Hal Ashby's Woody Guthrie biography, which is kind of forgotten but really good.
Oh, right.
With a lovely performance from Keith Carradine. And Network, All the President's Men, and Network, All the President's Men, Rocky, Bound for Glory, and the 5th one was Taxi Driver.
Right. Okay. Wow.
Right. And those are radically different films, styles of commentary. You could argue, and they're all deserving of the win. I mean, you could argue that the embrace of Rocky might have led to more feel-good blockbuster stuff, but that was already coming. The sense of Network being this weird New York studio production, it feels like an indie. It doesn't feel like a big A-list all-star film, although that's how it was marketed. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But it feels like this alien entity in the middle of all of those, because the other films are really very conventional narratives. Taxi Driver is highly stylized, but it's still a story about a man who loses his mind and murders people, thinking he's saving someone. And Rocky, underdog action, underdog sports movie. All the President's Men was the hot button political thriller, which is also tremendously good filmmaking. And Bound for Glory is the sort of the movie that everyone thinks of as an Oscar contender. It's a prestige Dust Bowl picture. It's very good, but it checks a certain box. And you get to Network, and what is it? It's almost. I'm going out on a limb here conceptually, but it feels now like a dystopian science fiction movie. It just happens to be taking place in the present day. That was the thing I took away from it the last time.
Absolutely, and I guess it's like the whole, like the whole Philip K. Dick thing of just like, it's reality, but we change one thing.
Yeah.
And I guess all you have to do is just like relax broadcasting standards. relax. Well, if you can create a world where a television company can fund a terrorist organization to give them footage. You change that one thing and then just like let everything else just like unfold as is. Yeah, and then I guess that's what you end up with. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, this is, because there are huge gaps in my film knowledge. I'm a kind of armchair fan, but I'm not entirely sure of the legacy of that project. And it's interesting that I suppose with something like Altered States, that what Panichowski did next was kind of in a sort of bid to have some kind of like ultimate control, kind of ended up kind of just like kind of clashing and producing, I suppose, quite a strange film as a result. And I guess maybe maybe the style of dialogue kind of appears in other places, but maybe that kind of story, which is just this kind of essay film, is, I'm not entirely sure where that reappears.
Yeah, I think it became a catchphrase more than anything else, because people would say, "Oh, it's like Network," and it never was. But it was an easy way to package a radical idea, and then miss the fact that Network is also a comedy, and it's a very precise satire to the point where, it stops being funny and becomes truly horrible, which is why it has its power. But you have to be able to hold all of those ideas in your head while you're watching it to really understand why it's so singular. And then people would say, "Oh, this is the new Network," and it never was. It was always just, I remember people trying to put that label on broadcast news on the James L. Brooks film, which is a lovely movie, but not Network. I mean, in no way. I mean, the closest it comes to any kind of satire is just to say, anchor people don't write their own copy, and sometimes they're not terribly bright and just good looking. And I remember being shocked. I was 21 watching this film thinking, I'm not supposed to be surprised by this, right? Like, this is just the way the world works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, like, and it's funny, there is like I feel like it's impossible to almost talk about Network. You can only talk about your individual experience of it, because the world has changed so much around us. But I imagine for everyone watching it, there's maybe a slightly different tipping point when suddenly you're like, oh, so you go like, this is ghoulish. Yeah. Then you go, this is hot. This is horrible. This is ghoulish, and then suddenly you're like, oh no, this is fast. This is funny, and there is. And I guess like exactly where that point is depends exactly when in time you're kind of like watching it, as to when it goes from being familiar to being kind of exaggerated.
I wonder if that's it too. There's the point where it becomes, you stop thinking of it as vaguely familiar and you recognize something. You actually connect to it in a real world way. I would have loved to see it with an audience in 1976. Just to find out how it played. I mean, I assume there was a lot of uncomfortable laughter, but there's also there is. You can't watch that Ned Beatty speech and not think that it's somehow somewhat funny.
Yeah,
I mean, it is wonderful, but it's terrifying and ghoulish and funny and exploitative, and it's also clearly the decision of a person who has realized the only way to intimidate an insane person is to be more insane. And you can see the actor making that character's choice, which is so fascinating in the middle of this whirlwind.
Yeah, the bit, I love it when he drops out of this that kind of like Shakespearean performance, and he just goes, "Am I getting through to you?"
Yeah.
There's a sort of I really love that moment. I kind of feel that like it's a shame that in many ways lots of these ideas now almost feel cliched, and it's not, but it's actually because we're living it so constantly that it becomes increasingly hard to get out from underneath it to be able to talk about it. But I had an experience that happened to me at university, where a friend had told me that about this group who he had met in a late night laundrette on campus who liked to get inside the tumble dryers and go around. So a big industrial sized tumble dryers you can fit a person in, and you can kind of go around inside it. And I thought, oh, I'd love to write a story about this for either for like the local newspaper or the college newspaper. And so I kind of went down to the laundrettes, kind of looking for any kind of people kind of doing that kind of thing. No one was around. I put up a sign in the laundrette saying, "Are you a member of Wash Club?" And I drew like a stick man plus tumble dryer equals question mark, and then I put my mobile number. And I was like, okay, well that's gonna get people. People, if you know what that means, then maybe someone will like contact me, and then I can interview them for this story. And immediately people started to text that number, wanting to join the club, not wanting to be part of it. I mean, immediately I was like, oh, I'm now the ringleader of the thing I was meant to be investigating. Yes. And that weird immediate like crossing the floor of realizing that like simply trying to document something and write it. I've inadvertently created it. So
did you, in the end? I have to know where this goes.
Yeah, sure. Well, I did. So what I did is I to begin with, I maintained the deception, and I sent people a message saying, "We're meeting next Monday. Come down."
Right.
Because I thought, oh well, I can go along pretending I'm a new recruit as well.
Oh, nice.
And then I can kind of talk to people while I'm kind of down there, and and I can get first hand their appearance. Now I'm kind of like undercover at this thing that I've utterly manufactured.
Right.
And so we could have set it up. But I did a little bit more research before heading down there about it, and basically there was like news stories of like kids who'd got inside tumble dryers years ago in like Wales, and there was like a story about kids who had got inside tumble dryers, and because the tumble dryer was like gas operated, they were asphyxiated by it. They didn't die, but like they were like really, really ill because they got inside kind of tumble dryer. And then I was like, oh well, my mate told me that that this happened on site, so I know that the ones on site are safe. I know that the ones on site are electric.
Right.
And then I just started to question whether the whole story was true in the first place. Yeah. I was like, he did also tell me that he went in and had his own go and insisted on being tumbled at the same temperature that he does his clothes. That is clearly not true. So now I'm like, okay, the guy's story was maybe like completely fabricated. So I went down there anyway, and only 2 people turned up, and I basically told them that like it could be really dangerous, and that I'd researched it. I didn't reveal that I was the guy who set it all up in the first place.
You were the skeptic.
I was the skeptic, and that was the end of that. It did still end up, another journalist wrote it up and put like a story in the local newspaper about it. So it still kind of like had this weird kind of this weird legacy on site, despite the fact that I actually think there was no original thing whatsoever.
Inadvertently, you didn't create an urban legend. You simply legitimized it.
I legitimized it. Yeah. And
everybody knows, of course, the first rule of Wash Club is that you don't talk about it.
Are you surprised to learn this is like maybe 2 months after Fight Club came out at the like in the cinema, and and I think it was just like it was people. I think people were up for it, and the same reason why I was up for it was because for a little moment you got to feel like you were in a film, and you got to relax the laws of reality,
sure.
And you got to kind of like indulge in this kind of like fictionalized version of yourself, and that's weirdly cathartic.
Oh, it's incredibly appealing, yeah. Just the chance to be not you for a bit, or a better version, more interesting version, looks good down the road.
And this is why I guess to today like why. Reality TV is seductive for people. It feels like this you're handing over this incredible trust, but like you get to be kind of like flattened out into this it's this could even be like this weird form of therapy. You're like, I want to see what other people see on the other side of the screen. I want to have this kind of reconstituted version of myself. You know, like so you kind of like hand over your life story to somebody else to do that.
I'm uncertain. Like, that implies so much more self-knowledge than the people on reality television seem to have, especially in the States, where it is just seen as the ultimate goal of people who don't have anything else, right? Like, to be famous is the solution to whatever problem you think you have, and it never is. I mean, maybe it is for the Kardashians, because they don't seem to really have problems in the first place. But the ordinary people who become reality stars, they're destroyed. Yeah. Every single one of them. Like, there's never the thing about Trump on The Apprentice was that he became a version of himself that was palatable to people. When now we're seeing him unmediated, and he's clearly just a morbidly obese, demented old man who is filled with hate and nothing more, and empty sorrow. John Oliver had this great bit where he says if you watch him, every time something happens, you can see a moment of brief curiosity of like, oh, maybe this will be the thing that makes me happy. Nope, that wasn't it. Over and over again.
He's I love watching back Trump's his time appearing in WWE.
Oh yeah.
Just how he's very, very good at that, all the wrestler shtick. He's very good at like testing sentences and working out what audiences respond to, and then keep saying those sentences again and again. And even the way he kind of like walks back and forth is just always reminds me now of just like his kind of like weird appearances in the ring. I mean, this is it, isn't it? It's everywhere. I mean, that reminds me of that great bit. It's in one of Peter Finch's like final monologues, where he's just like, "You maniacs, like we are the illusion. You're the real people." Like that idea of just like this complete inversion. I don't know which philosopher it was. There was a guy recently who reversed the Andy Warhol quote. So it's like, in our lives, we'll have 15 minutes of privacy. That's it. That's kind of like, that's what you'll get. So, look forward to it when it comes for your one brief moment of unmediated existence.
Yeah. Oh, we won't appreciate it till it's over.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it'll happen. And then you'll have dropped your phone in a lake, and then you'll kind of wander around the forest for a couple of days, and then come out and you'll be like, oh, that was beautiful.
Yeah, this is a monologue in someone else's play. That time, that was the best time of my life. Before the witch got me. But we are in this world that Network not only predicted, Network saw it coming, laid it out, and no one paid attention. Like, that's the best thing you can say about a truly successful satire is that if you wait long enough, it stops being funny.
Yeah.
And now it just seems like a blueprint. It's one of those films that you can only watch in the context of, right, sure, of course. Why wouldn't you make this movie? Why aren't there more movies about this? And the answer is because nobody was willing to take the conceptual dare that Chayefsky did, and talk Warner into doing, or MGM into doing it. And now we're in the wasteland that I predicted, and it's so depressing. It really is. I mean, this is what I mean when I say I would have loved to see a screening of it in '76 and wonder how people left the theater. Were they elated? Were they depressed? Were they shocked? What was the prevailing sentiment then?
Yeah, or were they just gone, bit on the nose, bit over the top, right? It's just like, way too, it's just like...
Yeah, I'm too smart for that.
Yeah,
I'll
come
never
on.
fall for this.
Absolutely. It's kind of always a kind of... this is like it's definitely like a condition of satire in general, isn't it? That actually, I don't know. Like I tried to write 2 years ago now, 3 years ago. I wrote like a play that was palindromic. So the first line of dialogue was the same as the last, and then second line the same as the thing. It was just an absolute nightmare to write. Can you tell originally that like it was an idea where it was like I had lots of fun pitching it, and then a nightmare time actually kind of like producing it. But as the conditions of this story kind of like unfolded, the story started to kind of reveal itself to me, and it did become a kind of satire about media. It was about like a guy who was a guy who had a sort of political talk show and enjoyed like kind of crucifying politicians on air, and enjoyed the kind of the circus elements of kind of bringing people on and then just like annihilating them, but kind of more for ratings than for anything else. And then at the halfway point in the story, they get arrested, and then lots of the stuff that he said in the first half all gets kind of used against him in the second half. But because I had to set it in to make the palindrome work, I set it in the near future, and I kind of added in lots of kind of media elements about how hate speech is going to kind of grow as a concept. You're not going to be able to put it back in its box until like any language which is kind of directed negatively at someone else will kind of count within kind of hate speech. So all kind of criticism is kind of like removed. And when the play was kind of finished and we kind of put it on, what we thought would be amusing, hilarious, kind of like farcical, oh look at the future, we're still already like kind of too close to the news to be able to for people to be able to kind of enjoy it and kind of laugh at it. It either made people sad or just felt obvious. And and we were like, okay, it's kind of that's a kind of problem with kind of trying to write satire. Definitely trying to write satire whilst also writing a palindrome. I would not recommend that.
God, no. But I think we are at a place where reality has outpaced satirical viability, because was it yesterday, the day before, that Nigel Farage was on a trawler throwing fish into the Thames and some sort of protest about fish, but I thought it was some kind of a hoax because it made no sense at all. And I'm sure it will be a sketch on somebody's comedy show by the weekend, but it's the level of performance in politics now, I think, has transcended satire, because the conservative movement is now simply anger and sort of a stubborn refusal to acknowledge that we're in the 21st century and the world is different and smaller and bigger at the same time, and just I want it to be like this imaginary the thing that the Republicans always sell, this imaginary version of the 1950s that never really existed, but women were quiet and you didn't see a lot of dark people, and it was just, it was like Mad Men, only less ironic. Yeah. And you can't satirize that mindset because there's just no point. No.
Yeah. So we've got this kind of weaponized nostalgia, and combined with these aggressive acts which are intentionally disruptive. They are just like, we're refusing to play the game, and so like it can feel just like bizarro performance art of watching like the ex-leader of UKIP throwing dead fish in the Thames, and that's but I guess the thing about like just like weird abstract like disruptive stuff, which is almost kind of like at its heart like meaningless, is that like both sides can code it, right? So like if you are just like refusing to actually explain what you mean, if you just want to keep saying Brexit means Brexit, and then you can leave other people to code that, like you basically you leave this kind of vacuum at the center, and then both sides can both do it, and it's oh no. This is it. I have like 2 coffees and then it's and then I'm gonna start to go down a kind of political rabbit hole.
You've hit the conceptual wall. That's how it works. But I mean, that is pretty much how this works. To look into network is to end up realizing just how much network is around you and how much it's around us and how it's, I don't think it shaped the world we live in, but it influences our thinking about it. That's probably the best thing a satire can do, is that it lets you it grants you that perspective that maybe you didn't have before.
Absolutely, yeah. And now that like we are part of the network, and that we that when we see something that feels authentic, that we like, that we agree with, we rebroadcast it.
Yeah.
You know, like and we and so we are also, you know, in our own little way, these weird little mini kind of micro nodes, right?
Yeah, amplifiers, signal boosters, all of that.
Yeah, and so therefore, of course, like, the content is lost, the message is not listened to, it's not contemplated, it's immediately reflected back out again, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, now without our little emblem next to it instead.
God help us. So is there anything from the film that this is the final question of the podcast, and I have to actually point out, you are the first person who has had a film discussed on the podcast to do the podcast yourself.
Oh yeah, no, I was so pleased. I was so lovely to hear that. I was overjoyed.
Yeah, I'm
really, really nice.
I'm so glad this worked out too. Is there anything from Network that you have, you know, used, borrowed, referenced, stolen, or otherwise incorporated into your creative DNA?
It's difficult, I think, in some ways. Like, thematically, it's so similar to the stuff that I'm interested in. My film, Stand By for Take Back Up, in part was all about taking mass-consumed media and trying to reinterpret it in a way that I found very personal, autobiographical messages inside it. And I think, but yeah, partly for me that was a question of, you know, like, in a world where we feel sometimes sort of stripped, or as if we're being like force fed a kind of like information, how we can kind of use interpretive power to kind of unravel that and to kind of like hide our own stories inside it. And I think that is kind of, in a way, sort of connected to that in many ways is me trying to find a response to Network in a way where you feel that any articulation of the self has actually been fed to you from somewhere else.
Right.
You know, like in this idea, I think in this idea that, yes, as we said earlier, like from the top on down, you know, like the teleprompter is being passed from like division to division until it ends up coming out of your mouth. I guess it's the idea of like trying to find a way of forcing something back up the pipe.
Yeah.
And trying to sort of reclaim control of something which, like on the surface, might seem as if it's kind of sanitized and kind of comes with a controlled message. But no, it's just, but it is a story that I think about like all the time, and whenever I'm trying to write a kind of a dramatic script, like I think about the way that Network builds, and about the way that it kind of like pushes against the idea of an arc, and instead just like hammers down on the same point again and again and again, and so like I think that's something that I is always in the back of my head when trying to write something new.
A better bludgeon.
Yeah, absolutely. Get a bigger hammer.
My thanks to Ross Sutherland, whose podcast Imaginary Advice can be found anywhere you listen to podcasts, probably the same place you listen to this one. If you're in Chicago, you can catch a live taping of an episode this Monday, October 1st, at Lynx Hall. Ticket information is available at imaginaryadvice.com. If you click on the Films tab, you'll find Ross's Stand By for Tape Backup in its entirety. And if you're in Raleigh, North Carolina, Ross will be performing that live at the VHStival at the Alamo Drafthouse Raleigh on Saturday, October 20th. That will definitely be worth checking out. You can find Ross on Twitter at Ross G. Sutherland, all one word, and you can find Network on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment. There's also a very good UK special edition from Arrow Academy. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps. It truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.